I believe we have some slides that just amplify a little bit on what we just saw, and really this may be second nature to those on the room. I know it is to those on the panel, but just to put some more rather staggering numbers under the main point of this session. So this, if you can't see it where you are, years of effective buying power. Asian Americans second only here to the Hispanic community. It was interesting to me just to see how far, by the way, life expectancy among the Asian American community outpaces some of the other groups. In the next slide, you'll see spending power per capita. And here, I mean, that's really quite extraordinary. We talk about the power of the Asian American spend, but nearly equivalent, as you see there, to Hispanics and African Americans combined. There's a regional look in the next one, which I think if one were to, this just shows by dollar amount and the diversity of those numbers around this country. You can obviously see a big swath there, kind of, I guess, west of the Mississippi before you get to the coast where there isn't much. But this probably speaks, I'm not an expert so I don't know, but just to that diversity of the Asian American consumer, which we'll get into, meaning you have, I'm sure, South Asian communities in some places there, Koreans, other East Asians, Chinese, and so forth. And then the last one is on overall buying power, which was referenced in the video. So on the one hand, it's the lowest of those graphs that represents the Asian American spend about to hit $1 trillion. But again, per capita, that's nearly hitting $1 trillion, but with far fewer representatives in the group. So with that as backdrop, we'll dive in, and I've asked neither Jody nor I are formally introducing the panelists we have, and I'll just say that they come to us not only very well equipped to tackle a deeper dive into these questions, but also they have a diversity amongst themselves in terms of what they do and how it relates. And so I've asked them each, since you've got their bios, to say a word about who they are, but also maybe something that's not in the bios about how they've come to this place and how their work relates to the subject. Daphne, why don't we pick it up with you?
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Daphne Kwok, and I'm just so pleased to be here with all of you today. I feel very fortunate that for my career, I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated from college. And having grown up literally inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway, where I still live today, I never thought I'd get involved in politics. But my career has taken me into the civil rights arena, into the political arena, and really to empower Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And so from growing up in a very non-diverse area of Northern Virginia to the work that I'm doing now, I feel very fortunate. My whole career has been in the nonprofit sector up until my job right now, although AARP is a nonprofit as well too, but a very, very large nonprofit. So I've been really very fortunate to have been able to serve our community from the civil rights perspective at the national level, and also for the empowerment of AAPIs, especially in the voting and empowerment realm that way. So why did a lot of people ask, why did I go to AARP? Where was that in my career trajectory? And for me, I wanted to take all the insights that I had gained from serving the AAPI community at the national level to an organization that was just starting out really in the multicultural space about 7 years ago. I've been there 5 years. And for AARP, the work that we do, right, serving those that are 50 and older in the area of caregiving, fraud prevention, income security, all of those issues are so key and critical to all of our communities, including the AAPI community. And I want to make sure that our community was getting those benefits, getting those resources, getting that information from such an entity like AARP.
It's my turn.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
First.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name's Niharika Shah. I head up brand marketing and advertising for Prudential, just 5 miles down in Newark. And when Tom was telling us that, to introduce ourselves, he said, say something that the audience wouldn't know from your bio. So Well, one of the things you'll know is I'm an avid gamer. I love to play video games. I've been playing it all my life. But to make the point about the philosophy and how we approach multicultural marketing, I'd invite you to play along with me. So by show of hands, raise your hand if I say something and you identify with it, right? Born in India. Good. Mother of 2 children. Foodie. loves to travel.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. A Bollywood fan? Yes.
Yes. Me too.
Trained classical dancer? Anybody?
That's not
all right.
Can we please find some trained classical dancers?
I did Indian drumming.
Okay, let's see this. And it's okay. You can raise your hand. I'm telling you it's okay. Knows how to count cards.
Ooh.
There we go. 1, 2.
Yes.
There we go. Let's play a game of bridge right after. And then finally, I'm not a millennial, but 40% of millennials would rather have a broken bone than a broken phone. So I am one of those people as well. So anyway, so now we know that there are a lot of things that even though we may not be from the same country or from the same culture, we have in common.
I love that.
Wow.
Yes.
Jeff, that's a very tough act to follow.
Now, I know, especially so Tom was saying that women are so much stronger than men. So what leave us? Right? And there's me too, and then there's nothing about men too, you know. So, but anyway, I'm Jeff Lin. I'm a co-founder of Admerasia. Unlike AARP or Prudential, a lot of you probably don't know about us. We're a private health, full service, integrated advertising agency specialized in multicultural segment with a sweet spot in Asian American. We have 3-pronged business model. First, most of our clients, 80%, are Fortune 100 clients. We also help a lot of mid-size, the small-size corporation from Asia, China, South Korea, Japan, come into the U.S. Any foreign company want to be a global brand, they first start in the U.S. And we are the bridge, we are the matchmaker as well. The third part of our business is for brand and products that who have Asian DNA. For example, one of our clients is a CJ Group with a lot of food, dumpling, noodles, drinks, things like that, who are originally Asians. And our goal is to make dumpling to be the halftime for every sport game. That sounds good, right? Yes.
How good is that
great.
game?
Yes. Anybody who have not tried that, do it. You're going to have a great party.
Thank you. That's also a tough act to follow. So thank you all. And you see just from those 3 sets of opening remarks and personal notes what I meant when I said this is a diverse trio we have here. So I want to move next then to, when we talk about this burgeoning, growing, staggering, pick your adjective, power of the Asian American spend. Obviously, when you work for Admerasia or you work for the AARP or you work for a financial services giant like Prudential, it's a very, very different proposition in terms of what it means. Start with you, Jeff, for a second. So Jeff's firm is a shade over 20 years old. Question number 1, I mean, first of all, I imagine right now, for all the reasons we've just gone through, very good for business. But what was talk a little bit about, with that 20-year time frame as a framework for the question, how this has changed in terms of what you do, and I mean, how much of a leap was it 20 years ago to where we are now?
Well, by the way, the company is 20 years old, but I'm the young startup with teenager, so don't guess my age. It's a constantly challenge. As we know, we talk about Asian Americans. The reality is we are the smallest minority, 5-6%, in the past 20 years, the process. It's always feel like, I don't know if you agree, disagree, always feel like a stepchild in the marketing, within the marketing field. Because the size, because the priority, and also I understand from a corporate perspective, you have deliverable, each quarter, every year. You have a main objective deliverable, and so Asians never come to, or it's hardly come to the priority. But if you can turn back to the previous slide, is it possible?
Why don't you go ahead while we,
as Tom, you mentioned earlier, Asians' spending power is close to trillions. And it's actually, although we are this smaller in populations, but it consists of 65% of the Hispanic total purchase power, 70% of total African Americans. So if you're a marketer and you're in charge with your marketing dollar spending, do you spend 65% by proportion to the Asians? The answer is, let me help you answer. The answer is not, and it was never been the case. And very excited about earlier Tom sessions. Another Tom.
Tom Doctorow.
Yeah, the Tom Doctorow.
Great, by the way. And I guess Tom is no longer with us at the moment, right? But thanks to him, that was great.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of changes in within the decade. There's a lot of immigrations changes. Populations, you can never look at. This is one of my channels. I always talking to the clients like, we should never look at the population size. Because in reality today, your brand exposed not by regions, but your brand exposed to could be virtually anywhere. Your smartphone, your wherever you go, or even the social media channel that you exposed to. So a Starbucks in China versus Starbucks in New York or Starbucks in South Korea, it should be the same. And for the consumer, they should not be segregated differently wherever they travel. Especially these days, the Asian populations also add up to, we have the two highest international student populations, Indian and Chinese. And Chinese and Indian also surpass Mexican as the fastest growing the new immigrant to this country. So when you add up, size is matter. When we talk about business investment terms, a good, sound investment, when you look at for any brands, when you look at it right now, is Asian Americans.
But can I stop you just for a second, Jeff? I'm sorry to interrupt, but just you're making the case that I think would be, at least in this room anyway, we'd all agree with. So I'm going to pick on that word you use, stepchild. And challenge you a little bit. Do you really think, given particularly the per capita number, as you say, that the Asian American consumer, and maybe I'll ask this of the other panelists as well, still is a stepchild, given the data, given the statistics, given what's in other words, yeah.
That's perfect questions, and I've been an advocate about this, and I've been very vocal, and so I always try to truth myself, and that's the way how I communicate with my team too, because you always need to speak the truth, talking to yourself or talking to your client. And in my office, the truth is a key word for anything. And so when you look at when you talk to the client, and every time when you go to a champion and proposing about any budget or spending, in reality, and I think that in this room, I hope people recognize that as well. In most corporations, not in this room, you guys are great, but in most corporations, in a corporate room, you are lacking a champion for Asian Americans. You have great diversity program for various of different segment and group, but very few Asians were actually willing to step out and advocate about it as well. It was great that we have taken into issues, and I hope that this can be live and broadcast to the rest of the corporate room. We have even one incident, and this is true, and I'm not making it up. After the elections, in one of the high-level corporate meeting, one of the CEO actually said that now it's a different country, it's a Trump country, we do not need to commit to multicultural. And that was heartbroken to hear it. So the politics play a certain part in reality in the corporate world.
Okay. Niharika, it's a good segue. Maybe let's go to the corporate world and your world. You said just a moment ago to me, I don't even remember what my question was, but you said all marketing is multicultural today. Can you explain what you mean by that? And also, I'm not clear in the giant world of Prudential and financial services generally. Yeah. Back to the initial question, what the power of the Asian American spend means for what you do. It's a big question.
It's a two-part question. The first one, I think when I said all marketing is multicultural marketing, what I meant was I think we moved away from it being a bolt-on and a side gig to now thinking about different macro, micro cultures as part of marketing, right? So the concept of general market and a multicultural market, I think, is a dying one. And I think for us to thin slice markets either only purely based on race and ethnicity, I think is also a very microcosmic view of looking at the broader opportunity. I mean, my point earlier that there's so many things that we share in common which may not fall in the category of race, cultural, ethnicity. This idea about, if I went to another room and asked how many fans of Peloton, for example, not financial services, I'm sure I'd find a whole community that is as diverse as America's, right? So I think that was the point that I was trying to make. And I think it's also, in fact, saying that rather than thinking of it as a bolt-on now for the total market approach to incorporate cultural nuances to avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen in the past year is inherently important. Not putting away to the side that I do think we need to appreciate the nuances, which is purely segmented marketing, right? Understanding your audience and personalizing to that audience. So that's what I meant. The second point around the buying power and the potential of the Asian American market. As a financial services company, we're in the money management business. Right. So, of course, it's of huge interest, this segment itself. I think what that means is that we need to have the right solutions and the right distribution model to be able to engage and serve this audience the way that it needs to be served, like other audiences, right? And I think money is inherently a very personal thing. So I would equate it to the way that you think about your overall health and wellness and your doctor. There's always a comfort level. If you're a woman, you're talking to a woman. Or they speak your own language. They understand the endocrinology of a person with an Indian American origin, for example. So I think there's something powerful for us to have financial advisors that understand that for this audience, remittance abroad is a huge deal, right? There's a whole community, and I think this sentiment is shared. They're more focused on ROI of investments, right? The money needs to make money. When I'm not making money, the money needs to be making money. So the insurance push is not that hard. So how do you balance that? And I think purely from an investment potential, really looking at commercial opportunities, because we as a financial services company serve both individuals as well as corporations. And then finally, I think looking at the emerging role of the Asian American leader in corporate America is an important one. And I think by modeling the right behaviors, by thinking about anchor institutions, by thinking about how I think diversity is about numbers, inclusion is about culture. Right. So how do you model those behaviors that leaders here in this room can take it, outside and model it within their own organizations?
A quick follow-up. It's really a follow-up to what we're talking about with Jeff. Do you agree with the statement that the Asian American is still a stepchild in terms of the way corporations look at different groups here?
I don't know if I would categorize it as such, because I think it always shows up in every market segmentation that you will do. There's an opportunity, and I think we all recognize it. I do think that the community, and I think it ties into something that you've said. My observation is similar to the Hispanic community, and I think it goes back to what is so amazing about the continent of Asia is the diversity, right? So we're not a monolith. And every country has its own. I mean, even within India, you've got like gazillion languages, right? So I think there's something really powerful in that diversity. But similar to the Hispanic community, what we lose by not having a monolithic sense of that spending power, is wielding the influence of what that power gives you. And so I do agree with you that I think we're quiet on issues. And if we're quiet on issues and we don't speak up at that time, when conversations are being had at board tables, trying to engage the Asian American community doesn't show up as a high priority.
Right. So that's another good segue, because Daphne is at the AARP, not so quiet on issues, right?
Absolutely not.
Actually, before we get to that, I just want to repeat your title, which I just find interesting and maybe just compels one quick question. So Daphne is Vice President of Multicultural Leadership, if I have this right, for Asia, American, and Pacific Islanders. And I wonder, first of all, how long has that title existed at the AARP? And is it to the point that multiculturalism and marketing, as Niharika said, is everywhere now? Is that a position that exists at major organizations everywhere? I mean, are you sort of lost without one now?
So I say that for AARP, actually, we're about to kick off our 60th anniversary. So AARP's been around for 60 years. And yet the multicultural...
Time to get the card then, right?
Well, at 50 years old, 50.
Okay.
You're 50, you're already eligible. But at AARP, so under this current effort for multicultural, I would have to say this has been the most robust effort for AARP. It's only been about 7 years. I've been there about 5 years. And at first, my first title when I went to AARP was Vice President Multicultural Markets and Engagement. So, and so we're under membership. And then within the last 2-3 years, we actually moved out of membership, and we are now underneath our community, state, and nationals. And that's where actually the advocacy, the programs, and working with state offices, which actually, to me, makes a lot more sense of where we can make the most impact. And so for us, a multicultural leadership, it's sort of a dual role. I play an external role, really trying to bring AARP out into the AAPI community to raise awareness, but then internally, really to help build the foundations through all of our different departments, whether it's a foundation or whether it's the business sector or whether it's public policy or whether it's programs, so that there's a better understanding of the AAPI community. So my role is a dual purpose. I will say that within other large institutions or corporations, I think there are different iterations of these multicultural leadership departments or offices or whatever titles they may have. I think it also varies as to the impact and effectiveness of these. As we all know, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there has to be the leadership from the very, very top. And if you don't have that commitment at the top, it's really not going to happen at the bottom. So right now we have a very strong leader, Joanne Jenkins, who has institutionalized multicultural work throughout. And so we're working to help AARP embed it throughout the institution. But going back to the question, are AAPIs a stepchild? I have to say, absolutely we are. And not only in the marketing field, but also in philanthropy. If you really look at all the dollars that go to other organizations or other constituent groups, and you look at the funding that has gone to the AAPI community, it's been dismal over the last 2 decades. The percentage is in the single digits, and it hasn't moved. And yet our population has been burgeoning over the last several decades. So that's one example of a stepchild. If you look at marketing dollars, and actually Doris and I just came off the Asian American Advertising Federation's conference about 2 weeks ago. Once again, hearing the conversations that are happening among advertisers, among Asian American media, the dollars are not there. The revenue for those media agencies especially is not coming in because, for corporations and those with the funding that want to reach the Asian American community, for the most part, we are still not seen as a top priority. And I think, the data, we keep showing the data. We know that data is so key, and that's why it's so important that we continue to put out data, disaggregated data, because as we've said that within the AAPI community, there are all the different sub-ethnic groups, and each one of those has very different unique needs. And when it does come to data, one of the most important things when it comes to research is that data also needs to be collected in language, because for the AAPI community, almost 2/3 of our community are still immigrants, and so English is not going to be their native language. And to get a real robust, accurate picture of our community, data collection has got to be in language, which we barely ever see because it's so expensive to do.
So, yeah.
Can I jump one thing?
Sure.
Hashtag stepchild. We just started a movement. If you agree, please. It's going to be trending soon. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Just a question really for any of you. Because listening to this, on the one hand, you think, listen, the corporate world is generally speaking, knows what it's doing and is in terms of at least money and data and, is responsive generally to these things. But is part of the problem here that if I'm selling to, you mentioned that it's different with the Hispanic community. Right. Is the diversity and the fact that the Asian American community is no more a monolith than Asians are a monolith part of the issue? Because depending on what I'm making, what products I'm making, what service I'm providing, it might be totally different, probably is totally different. If I'm thinking about the Chinese American community, I'm thinking about the Iranian American community, I'm thinking about the Korean American community. And so when you talk about, in other words, if the graph there were to divide it, splinter off into all those segments, I mean, how much of that may have to do with why the sort of obvious case that these numbers make when you drill down is a little tougher?
I think we understand when you go to segmentation, we talk about marketing, and all the things that you brought up is absolutely true. Asians is very diverse, and there's so many nuances on all the different ethnicity, the language, culture, the generations, the preference. But that should not be an excuse, right? I mean, as a marketer, you always find solutions. I just want to follow up with Daphne, we just mentioned too. When there's a limited of the resource and the study there to really help to build the case, and a lot of Hispanic, for example, you have more robust system in the marketing world. You track and you have a data to support it. Imagine if it's and for the Asians, all the Asians media and a lot of Asian media will come in later to join us this afternoon. A lot of Asian media was not tracked and was not accounted for. Today, the Asians no longer just reading the all-in-language media. They are on the phone all the time. They are connected to the media across the globe. Where did that put that into your equations when you are talking about what Asians read and the touch point? I think those may be rule meant to change, and maybe we should look at Asians, not the same formula, the same way when you talk about reaching out to African American or Hispanic, right? Mm-hmm. And so perhaps give it a different angle and with the subtlety and as we mentioned, I think Nielsen started to do the tracking and create a lot of amazing report. Recently, just have a new report as well, and we approach that, and we also we'll hope that there are more investment from the corporate and the support can make the report even more robust and more grounded, because a lot of Asians in language media or in language audience need to be counted for.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any Niharika or Daphne, do you have a response to that notion about is the segmenting of the population a factor when you look at the stepchild syndrome, if you will?
Well, I think segmentation, I mean, that it's been a drumbeat, and I am definitely not a STEM person. I failed basically algebra and geometry. I had to repeat it in high school. But I have to tell you, in the last 10, 15 years in my work in the community, every single meeting I go to right now, all we're talking about is data disaggregation, data, and how critical. And I think especially for you on the corporate side, you know how important data is. But for the Asian American community, it's something we're constantly having to push for, the importance of data disaggregation. I had the great honor of serving President Obama, chairing his advisory commission on Asian Americans. I can't tell you, every single agency we went to, whether it's Health and Human Services, whether it was Department of Transportation, whether it's energy, every single department, one of our top 3 policy asks was the importance of collecting disaggregated data. And it's so key because from that, we keep talking about insights. That's one of the things I've learned now in this marketing now, right, is insights. The insights are so key and critical, but you're never going to get true insights about our Asian American Pacific Islander, and I have to say Pacific Islander also, community if we don't have disaggregated data, because the needs are so key and critical. And so while these trends and all these dollar amounts, are going up, it is so key that we do break it down so we really understand the differences among the different ethnic groups.
Anything to add, Niharika?
The only thing that I would add is, yes, it's inherently complex in a business like ours, where the segments are narrow and diverse, and to fulfill against the value proposition. So you can imagine, if you will, and that's why we take a more bottoms-up view to developing the market. You have to have, at the end of the day, an advisor who can meet with and understand this sort of nuanced and the intricate needs, right, and build a relationship. So our approach has been built from the ground up, where we have a strong distribution. We'll support that locally.
Right.
And from a marketing perspective, whether it's on the diversity and inclusion side or on a true favorability and driving business ROI standpoint, is to provide the air cover.
Right. So Admerasia, your company, Jeff, has a little segment in one of your presentations, and I'm sure others do too, Principles for Engaging Asian Americans. And that's, in a way, that's the core of what we're talking about. Let's put aside the stepchild syndrome for a moment.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask all of you, because again, back to what I said at the outset, you do such different things for such different organizations. And so what are principles that you think are proven and work and should be followed by others for engaging Asian Americans? And since it's yours, we'll start with you.
Actually, I'm going to narrow it down to 3 points instead of 5, because we're going to sit here the rest of the afternoon. Yeah. I think a lot of things that what actually related to what Tom showed earlier, the segment. Number one rule, I would say, learn from Asians, because that is what's happening. Asia is far more advanced in technologies. The lifestyle there is very different than what if people had never visited. You hear the speech earlier. It's a wallet-free society.
Wallet-free.
Wallet-free.
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends actually always told me when they come back, non-Asian, when they go to China, for example, when they come back, they will say, I feel like I'm from the third world country, because a lot of people don't take credit card and they don't take cash, right? All they want is from the mobile, and I have Apple Pay. You see, got the joke? Because they don't have the Alipay, they don't have the WeChat Pay, and so they were totally cut out. They have to stay in the hotel. They can't go to adventure and to see what's out there in the little stand. If you want to buy a juice, you want to buy a little buns, you cannot. They don't take your money, right? You cannot get a bicycle. Of course, there's a fundamental system difference in the East versus the West. The same thing we talked about earlier cannot be changed. A lot of things, if we want to catch up with the rest of the world, a lot of things fundamentally need to change. The government takes them so many years. Now they start to recognize maybe we should go back to space, right? I'm an avid for the alien culture, everything. So, so I'm biased. But I think it's important that if any corporate or any marketer, we can start to look back instead of talk about the prior of what we have, but look at Asia as a learning point to get started with. The second, as I mentioned earlier about the purchase power, about the reality of the Asians spending, the opportunity, affluent, educated, they are sensitive to new brand, they are constantly curious and on the move. They are mobile driven. So there are a lot of opportunity to really reach out to them in a very different way. We don't need to go the same pattern of your strategy, how you do in technical with a Hispanic or African American, because it's just a very different rule and a very different lifestyle. But I would say that if you do your math, right, if you can do not 65% of your Hispanic market and not 70% of the African American market, maybe just about 40% of your money to invest in Asians. You invest it almost like the stock market. You buy it low, right? You're gonna wait for the Asian markets, Asian American stock market rocks in the next couple of years. So smart investment. Look into that area, right?
Okay.
The third point, I think that you talked about earlier, I think this is extremely important. We do recognize the diversity, the differences within the Asians. Right. And so we cannot be only one look and one size. It is difficult, it is challenging. I would say it's an excuse. Because if we corporately really recognize it, you always find a way to communicate directly. And today's, we don't want to call media, but in today, a lot of touch point, you can customize, you can dedicate it in pre-program in so many different ways, and it was very efficient. And so that's my talk.
Daphne, do you have a different or additional principle for engaging Asian Americans?
So our work with AARP, our strategy has really to be to identify community leaders that are our spokespeople. I would say spokespeople is very key. Who you put in front of which audience is really, really key. Not only should it really be that same ethnic group. I am Chinese American. I have done Filipino TV and media, and at least my grandparents lived in the Philippines, so I can say that. I can at least say salamat, right? And so, but it doesn't really cut it. But so what we have done is really identify key community leaders who are credible within the community, who have followings. And so for us to be able to talk about caregiving in particular, how important it is to care, we have two major community leaders, General Tony Taguba, talking about his personal caregiving experience to the Filipino community, although it transcends as well too. And then Richard Louis of MSNBC, who is our spokesperson across the board, but also talks about it from the Chinese American perspective of caregiving for his father. So we have identified key community leaders that can help us really spread our message and our work. And that has been a very key component to outreaching to the AAPI community. Also community organizations, to really partner with those organizations that are on the ground, because they are the ones that have access, right? And they have the channels into the community, and so they are very key as well.
Anything to add?
Well, the only thing it's really, really easy to get it wrong. And I think that's one thing that you have to be really careful about and mindful about in terms of how you cast the team, how you cast the agency, who you have looking at the work. It reminds me of, this was way back when, about 14 years ago, 15 years ago, with one of the fast food brands that shall remain nameless, but they sent to me a postcard in the mail that said, because you don't eat beef, here's your new vegetarian patty, whatever. And actually, I love my steak. So I was like, well, who are you to make presumptions about me, right? And because of that, what they were trying to do was to leave a very positive impression and show that they cared, but they just got it all wrong with me. So I think that's one of the things that I keep reminding.
Trying too hard, yeah.
Trying too hard and not investing. I think in really understanding whether this was a message that they could send out, and not understanding the diversity of the audience, right? That there are, in fact, non-vegetarians from within the population. So I think that would be one caution, which is it's really, really easy to get it wrong.
But it's very, very healthy, though. With that attitude, with that dialogue, I think it's help for the society, for people to understand the differences. Without that dialogue, people continue to assume things differently.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.